What's up, y'all? It's your boy JTMM, aka JustTenMoreMinutes, aka the Freaking 10. Welcome back to Tuesday. And Tuesday, you know what that means? That means we've got Sabaton history. And this one we're covering Versailles. Now, again, the title is what gets me on this one, right? I mean, we understand treaty signed, war ended, but it will be what you make of it is a very interesting title. And I think are they signifying of, the treaty is what you make of it truly, or is there something behind that? That's what's piqued my interest in this whole thing. Is I saw that title come up when obviously I searched for the song, and that just triggered in my mind, okay, what's the thinking here? So I'm interested to see. So with that being said, let's check it out.
Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton.
And you are watching Sabaton History, and this is Versailles.
The war had been raging and ravaging for 4 years, leaving millions of casualties from all sides. In the trenches of the front lines, people have asked the question, what is the price of peace? How many more must die? Exactly 5 years after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, Germany is forced to sign an unconditional surrender. For the signing of this historical document, the French city of Versailles is chosen.
Sign a treaty to change the world. Tensions fall and the peace unfurled. Nothing like what had come before. It's a deal, it's a treaty that will end the war.
There are a lot of myths and misconceptions around the Treaty of Versailles, and most of them stem from people not knowing what it actually was. It was not the treaty that ended the First World War. No. It was one of 5 treaties that did so, treaties signed with all of the Central Powers that arose out of the Paris Peace Conference that began in January 1919. You know, in 1919, the majority of the world had not yet achieved rule by the people, but lived in dependencies under ruling families. And of those countries that had become nation states or constitutional monarchies, only 4 of them, New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, and Norway, were full democracies with universal suffrage. France and the USA, for example, were still not full-fledged democracies since women did not yet have the vote. People wanting a say in their nation's own destinies creates national and international conflicts. And this is a major topic of the Paris Peace Conference, which is held without the involvement of the defeated Central Powers. The Allies negotiate amongst themselves through the winter and the spring. The top representatives from first the Council of 10 and then the Big Four meet nearly 150 times to make decisions that the General Assembly then ratify. The minor nations can make recommendations, and some do become part of the various treaties. The Treaty of Versailles with Germany, signed June 28, 1919. The Treaty of Saint-Germain with Austria, signed September 10, 1919. The Treaty of Neuilly with Bulgaria, signed November 27, 1919. The Treaty of Trianon with Hungary is signed June 4, 1920, and the Treaty of Sèvres with the Ottoman Empire is signed August 10, 1920.
So that's interesting to me because, they don't really talk about those as much, right? I mean, Versailles is kind of the main one. And don't, I should have known better than to get up as early as I did yesterday to record the other one. I only say that because for whatever reason, and don't ask, I have no clue, but I was mixing up the world wars here because I was thinking, oh, they signed the treaty, and I was thinking, yeah, that ended, that was World War II and ended the Great War. Duh, no. And it came clear first thing this morning. I was like, dude, you're going to sound like an idiot yesterday. It wasn't firing on all cylinders. I'm still battling this whole thing, which really sucks. I mean, to be honest with you, 4 weeks of it. But yeah, it just wasn't clicking yesterday. And then as soon as they said it 1919, I was like, oh, Yeah, dumbass. Oh, man. I'm losing it. Okay. So if they signed the 5 treaties, obviously one with each, I'm assuming then they talked about it and met the same way they did Versailles, that they would have done for all of those, where they went in and ratified those after they had come up with it, which is interesting. Fascinating. All right, let's keep going.
David Stevenson writes, the peace treaties were the preeminent political legacy of the conflict. The struggle to enforce them was the central issue in post-war international politics. More on that in a bit. A lot of nations are unsatisfied with the treaties. Italy suffered huge casualties in the war, but does not get most of its major war goals, even though they won. Many of the French don't think the treaty is harsh enough on the losers. Japan neither gets all the territory in China they want, nor the clause on racial equality on which they have insisted. China feels betrayed, though, because Japan does get to keep Chinese territory, but China was an ally, too. King Faisal does not get a united Arabia, and he is caught up in a complicated system of colonial mandates between France and Britain. The British do promise him that he will get what he wants if he signs the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement, guaranteeing a Jewish state in Palestine as outlined in the Balfour Declaration. Long story for another day. For now, he signs, and he will await delivery on those promises. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson is interested in rebuilding the European economy, but he is more idealistic about free trade, self-determination, and mandates for former colonies. At the top of his list is creating a League of Nations to ensure world peace. Ironically, the U.S. Senate will refuse to ratify American membership in the League of Nations. So, in the end, what the president creates will go on without U.S. participation. Wilson also opposes any harsh treatment of Germany, but France and Britain override this. The Treaty of Versailles requires that Germany accept the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage of the war. This is the war guilt clause, which is in all of the treaties. But these are the general terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany must cede Alsace-Lorraine to France. They must recognize Czechoslovakia and Poland and give up land to them, as well as giving up colonial holdings in Africa and the Pacific, though those had already been lost during the actual war. By March 1920, the German army can number no more than 100,000 men. The general staff is dissolved, all arms trade banned, and limits are imposed on the manufacture of war material. The Navy is trimmed to just 15,000 men, and Germany is not allowed to have an air force at all. There will be reparations to pay, but it will take time to determine just how much. In the meantime, Germany is hit with a heavy fine to pay for Allied occupation costs. The war guilt clause, by the way, is the justification for the reparations. If you broke it, you fix it.
I struggle with that one, if I'm honest. Because your gut feeling is to say, yes, you broke it, you fix it. I get that part. Where I struggle with it is telling a country how many troops it can have, and you can't have an air force. I mean, obviously we're looking at history here, but I struggle with that thought at the time, because while I get it that they were the offenders in this, you're now weakening them if someone decides to go in and take them out. Now, obviously different. I mean, we're talking about history here, but at that time I would really struggle with that thinking. I understand we're going to give up a lot, but that would go for any country, not just Germany. I do have a problem with them allowing, or limiting what their troop numbers were. That's an odd clause for me. I get the justification of it, but man, would I struggle with that, because especially, when you've got what you just went through, that you would easily give that up. Man, yeah, I wouldn't do that to any country.
A fragile but hopeful peace falls upon the European continent. America returns to their shores, Russia tend to their own matters, and the British Empire disbands their colonial forces. Parades are being held in victorious countries. The war that would end all wars is over.
There's been a lot of talk about reparations, particularly about the German ones, though the other Central Powers had to pay them as well. The issue is often seen as one of fairness or unfairness, or about their effect on the German economy. The German economy does collapse post-war, and in the early 1920s, they do suffer from hyperinflation. But there's a way, way, way bigger culprit for that than any amount of reparations could ever be. Germany fought the entire war on credit. See, France and the US, for example, raised taxes to pay for the war. Germany did not. They took loans to finance the entire 4 years of the World War.
Wow.
Millions upon millions of marks of loans to pay for all the equipment and weapons and all the supplies and offensives made by millions and millions of soldiers. They took those loans because they did not consider the possibility of losing the war. And they thought they'd pay them back with the spoils when they won. But then they lost, and the loans were due to be repaid. And make no mistake, they did lose the war. In November 1918, Germany was last man standing of the Central Powers. The Western Front, the final active front, was collapsing, and several million soldiers from the Allied nations were marching unopposed up through the former Austro-Hungarian Empire towards Bavaria. The Central Powers lost the war. It was German Army Chief of Staff Paul von Hindenburg and Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff, who had run a virtual military dictatorship of Germany in the later stages of the war, and who very well knew they had lost the war, who really spread the myth that Germany was stabbed in the back and defeated by elements at home, and not by their own military failure to defeat the enemy. Ludendorff actually was eventually the co-star in Adolf Hitler's failed beer hall push, and according to the movies, he was killed by Wonder Woman. But the stab in the back myth served several purposes, not just ego. See, if you didn't really lose the war, then any reparations, no matter how large or small, would be unfair. In fact, imposing them on an undefeated enemy would be a humiliation. It was this, of course, that became one of the rallying calls of the Nazis. And since modern Poland, for example, was created by the treaty, Hitler did not recognize the Polish border. In terms of amounts, the reparations were not unprecedented. Heck, Germany ended up paying less for World War I than the French had paid in 1871 after losing the far shorter Franco-Prussian War fought on their own soil. An awful lot of Frenchmen remembered that well in 1919, and many of those were at the Paris Conference. And one single year earlier, in 1918, after Russia had pulled out of the war after the revolutions, the Central Powers, well, Germany, forced the Brest-Litovsk Treaty on the Russians, which really was completely humiliating. So no one was exactly sympathetic when 15 months later the Germans complained, this is too harsh. It was a case of don't dish it out if you can't take it. Now, in the hyperinflation period in Germany a few years later, it got to the point where literally your entire life savings could maybe buy a loaf of bread. And the Allies did not accept reparation payments in worthless, inflated German currency and wanted something backed in gold. That is true. Germany asked for a moratorium on the payments until they could get their economy sorted out. Britain said okay, France said no. Germany did soon sort out its economy, and the second half of the decade in Germany was even called the Golden 20s, but by then the damage was done. The unfairness of the reparations and the illegitimacy of the treaty as a whole would be a rallying call in Germany in the 20s and 30s, especially by Hitler and the Nazis, although they did not become a major political party until the 1930 election, many years after hyperinflation was over.
But that part is to me the key, right? Because I mean that if they're not recognizing the treaty, then a lot of the World War II makes a lot of sense, and why they felt like they did and why they did what they did. Which again, this is not me playing ignorant. I mean, it just wasn't taught as in depth as this of both World War I and World War II as the true starting of it, right? It was just Hitler was crazy, here we go. That's really what was enforced. So a lot of this, is brand new to me, which is eye-opening because it all now makes more sense as to the motivations behind, you know, uh, both World War One with the start of that at Sarajevo versus what will become World War Two. Fascinating. There's a lot of psychology behind this that I just didn't know that makes a lot of sense as to why people acted the way they did. Especially if, signing these treaties, and I get the title now, obviously, but signing these treaties, if you're not recognizing it and not all parties are recognizing it, yeah, it makes perfect sense why they would do that. Man, that's why I love watching these things. It truly is. It's fascinating in that sense, but it's also just the point where it's, wow. All right, let's keep going.
The war that would end all wars is over. But not everyone agrees. In the underground, something is growing in the dark. Because for some, the war never ended. War will never entirely die. It will evolve. It will change. And war will return. Sooner than we think.
As for other nations' views on the subject, well, look at Belgium, who was neutral, but whom the Germans invaded with millions of men because it was on the way to France, whoever's fault the war was. 95% of Belgium had been occupied for 4 years. It was stripped of its resources and its industry, and 120,000 Belgians had been deported to be workers in Germany. And those that remained certainly had no real civil liberties during occupation. So while many people often wondered what the purpose of the war was, the Belgians did not. And they did not just want their land back, they wanted revenge and they wanted security. And this they expected from the peace settlement. One big thing that Wilson was really trying to push was national self-determination. Every national race should have its own lands. Considering that the US was a nation made up of immigrants, though, Wilson's stance against multi-ethnic empires or nations was, well, kind of inconsistent. But in practical reality, the borders that were now drawn for these new nations caused 30 million Europeans to end up on the wrong side of their new national border. And that would have a huge effect on Europe the next 20 years. What had been Austria-Hungary was divided into a variety of nations, but even the new Republic of German Austria, which soon became the Republic of Austria, and Hungary themselves were very much reduced in size. Both were now landlocked without ports as well, and Hungary was just 28% of its former size. Bulgaria also had to give up land, but not nearly as much. Army sizes were restricted for all of them. The treaty with the Ottomans, though, was never ratified by anyone, let alone enforced. Mustafa Kemal and the Turkish nationalist movement had created a state that was deemed to be not a successor state to the Ottoman Empire, and thus was not blamed or punished for the Great War. But signing a treaty and then enforcing its terms are two different things. I mean, it was pretty clear that the Germans weren't going to voluntarily comply with the Treaty of Versailles. So the Allies had to think about continuing military occupation or enforcement at a time when their soldiers desperately wanted just to go home and get on with their lives. In many ways, the Allies' real failure with Versailles was the lack of resolve in enforcing its terms.
Okay, that makes
in
sense,
and of
yeah.
itself, the treaty certainly is not an inevitable link to World War II. There could very well have been a reconciliation with Germany, who could have continued to be kept militarily powerless. But the biggest problem facing the Allies after the treaties, all of the treaties, was the same problem they always had: disunity. Heck, Russia and the Bolsheviks were unapproachable after the Allies had bet and lost on the whites winning the Russian Civil War. Italy and Japan became unapproachable over time, and the US, France, and Britain stopped cooperating with each other simply because they had different long-term goals. And everyone has a selfish national perspective, too. Britain, for example, had gotten pretty much everything she wanted from the treaties. So if Italy or the US or whoever were unhappy, well, okay. What Georges Clemenceau told the French Parliament seems to me to be pretty true. The treaty will be what you make of it. And we know what people made of it. Hitler made a lot out of it. But if the reparations had been smaller or even non-existent, he would have still made a lot out of it. I'll end with one thing, though. People can twist and turn facts and events and reverse engineer things to claim that X caused Y. I mean, we've all seen that often enough in our lives. But there really is one way that the Treaty of Versailles did lead to World War II. It was not enforced. Had it been enforced in the 1930s, then Hitler's Germany would not have had the military force to attack anyone. But it was not enforced because no one in French or British command, no one could really believe that anyone who had gone through the hell of the First World War would ever want another. They were wrong.
Yeah, that's just a BS way of thinking. I mean, I get it at the time, right? I mean, that's your kind of emotion is, they don't want to go through that again. They just signed this, yeah. But man, you got to learn from your mistakes. I mean, look at what's not been enforced in today's world, right? With a lot of things. There's laws today just within the US that are not enforced because part of the population doesn't believe in it. And so nobody really enforces it, yet it's still against the law. I mean, I'll break it down to the simplest of ways is you have a speed limit when driving, right? For those that have speed limits, police have the ability to pull you over if you're going 1 mile, 1 kilometer, whatever, over the speed limit. But do they? No, they always leave a little bit of wiggle room. And that's the simplest way to look at this for me is if you allow that wiggle room and you don't enforce it the way you wrote it, it's going to get broken. And I see it every day and it drives me absolutely crazy of people going, 20, 30 miles over the speed limit. And nobody cares. It's not enforced. So it makes perfect sense when they say it'll be what you make of it. I mean, a lot of laws are that way. Right? We see, the criminalization of marijuana as an example, where, it's become such a social accepted piece of society for a lot of people that a lot of law enforcement won't enforce, it's under this certain, whatever it's measured in, I don't know. Okay, that's not enough. We'll just leave you alone. We'll take it, throw it away. Okay. If you're not going to punish it, then don't have the law. That's really what it is. And that's what it is for me with these treaties. Don't sign a treaty unless you plan on enforcing it. And we see what that causes across the world. Anyway, I could go on and on. Law enforcement is, and when I say law enforcement, this is not a knock against police. It's a lot of the politics behind it that stop them from enforcing it the way it should be, right? Just public opinion, whiny ass little people that, just want to be left alone and do anything illegal they want to and don't think they should get punished for it. We see it, right? That at its simplest form is to me what these treaties are. And truly, thinking about it now, it will be what you make of it. And I don't know why I was confusing this with the Second World War. I really don't. But, man, as soon as it clicked this morning. All right, let's finish this up.
When you were writing Versailles, what were you actually thinking? Were you actually trying to think, oh, we've got a song, we're going to force some lyrics to it? Or were you thinking, let's write a song about Versailles and...
This came sort of at the same time as Sarajevo, as we were writing that, and we were almost done with it. It actually started with Versailles before we were even done with Sarajevo, because it's, I don't know if some of you realize, but there's the chorus is a mirror of each other. It's
Correct.
a minor in Sarajevo.
Yeah.
And then it's in major in Versailles. And
Wait. Sabaton in a major key. Now, as we learned, no. I want you to cast your mind back to episode 2, Blood of Bannockburn, when you specifically told me that was the only song Sabaton had ever written in a major key. And that was because of the bagpipes, right? Or
I don't. Yeah, you have an amazing memory.
I've been hosting these episodes as well, you know. So actually, I don't know the numbers of all the episodes, but I remember number 2 was Blood of Bannockburn, and I specifically remember it was the only song Sabaton had ever done in a major key.
It was.
I mean, we know how Sabaton's song construction is because we're Sabaton fans. So
Yeah, well, we thought we wanted to have them as sort of distorted mirror images of each other. Sort of as in one is the start of the conflict and also start of the album. And one is, well...
An end of the conflict.
An end of the... one of the things leading to the end of the conflict. They sort of worked very well together, and they were... We thought we'd do perfect mirror images first, but it didn't work out because it turned out to be bad music. And I also believe it's the only time we used a sample of a flute. And I swore to myself I would never do that.
You specifically swore to yourself, you looked in the mirror and said, Joachim, you are never going to use a sample of a flute.
That's what keeps me up at night, man.
That you used to sample a flute, or that you want to, but you never did?
I don't remember. If I'm honest now, I don't remember if it was a clarinet instead of a flute.
Why didn't you get a real flute or a real clarinet?
Didn't know any players, actually.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if we wanted...
You're going to hear some in the comments. You know that. So.
But if we would have wanted something, a big part of it, like we want a cello for this part. Of course, we get Tina. We worked with a couple of times, and we could do something cool with it. But here we're only talking about something whispering in the background for a few seconds, and at that point it makes no sense to get a real player.
You said, but that music sucked. I'm like, what was so wrong with the music?
I mean, in a sense, if you have it's always nice to use variations on a theme, like they use in classical music.
Sure.
But I found that if you really have this idea, I'm going to turn this thing from major into minor.
I hate this angle of the camera, by the way.
If you do it like an idiot and do it exactly as it can be done, it's usually it's not sounding very good. I mean, sometimes you're lucky and it actually fits. But in many cases, it's a variation where you actually allow a little bit of modulation or changes to happen, where you can get something good out of it. And it's really nice because, once again, sitting with Chris, and we are both really perfectionists. We can twist the smallest melodies around for hours and hours on end. And it's a fun experiment, and I learned a lot by doing it because it is a bit of a different song and a different soundscape, I guess.
Okay.
Different instrumentations.
I like when we suddenly get to like a serious musical bit and stuff.
Oh, sorry, guys. It's not going to happen again.
I'm going to totally lighten it up and say, you learned a lot doing that. I'm like, you didn't learn how to play flute.
Obviously.
Because
there are only there's a certain extent to how far I'm willing to learn, how much I'm willing to learn.
Have you ever been to Versailles?
No, I have never been to Versailles.
Neither Sarajevo nor Versailles.
And I have not been to Normandy beaches.
Say that out loud?
No. I'm so ashamed.
Okay, but I'll tell you what. Now, we are actually recording this in February. Now, in July, I will be filming, this is probably out by then, in the Normandy beaches doing stuff for the World War II channels, 24 hours of D-Day coverage. So we got to do all the live stuff and stuff. You should come down.
I will. If I promise you right here, right now, and I got some witnesses here, I guess. If it is at all possible and it fits with our,
with your schedule
with what we're doing. If I have time to come for a couple of days between festivals, I'd love to do that.
That would be great. We could even go to Versailles. Although it's a bit of a hike to Sarajevo.
Let's save that for another time.
Okay, we're going to save Sarajevo for another time.
Until we get the comments from the guys.
Until we get the comments from the guys.
Yeah, or the girls.
Yeah, I like that. Just we're leaving this generic, like it's like a can of food that says food on it. We're leaving it with a generic. Till we get the comments, then we'll do the thing, and then that's what we're gonna do. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what have you been watching?
Sabaton history.
See you next time.
It's the war of
All right, everyone, that's it for this week. So remember to click that bell. It's really important. Click it now. And then, hope to see you again in the near future. Bye-bye.
So here's to me, and I mean, I really kind of nailed it on my last part where I paused it before they got into the song itself, which still doesn't connect with me. I get the mirroring. And like I said, it made sense why they did it that way. It's one of those where I'm not a fan of the mirroring when you change the lyrics, because for me, when you're writing the lyrics, you're writing it for a particular beat, a particular melody. And so, yes, while the mirroring for this works and the logic behind it of the start and finish makes perfect sense, just not something that I'm a fan of. But, some people like it. Hey, no big deal. As to the treaties, it's kind of like what I said, right? So now it makes a lot more sense now that my head is out of a very dark place. But to me, I still think about all of the things that they were sitting there talking about and all of the treaties and how just that enforcement of it, yeah, you're going to drive a nation crazy with that. I mean, but we do that today with a lot of stuff, right? I mean, look at the sanctions. We oppose, and I speak that as America, impose on these other countries of saying, hey, you violated this here, we're going to go sanctions. And we've had wars over it, whether it be Iraq, whether it be, there was one more before that, not Iran, but there was another one, I forget. But I mean, we hear about sanctions all the time that are being imposed. And how much of it is followed through, right? It just, or followed through, excuse me. I don't know. Is it all just for news and they just say we're going to impose this and then there's so much funny money out there that nobody ever sees it? That would be interesting to me. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Man, that just leaves more questions than answers for me. Yeah. And I'm trying to get through these. I want to get through these because I do want to have the time to start Indy's channel. I haven't looked to see if there's any reactions yet. If people are doing that, I would assume so, as reactions come on every darn video that we see out there. But I'd like to see that because I want to make sure there's no copyright issues where we can post those, and B, it's just finding the time for it. So I'm gonna work that in. We'll see where it ends up. Until that time, I'll see you on the next one. Y'all know who I am and what I'm about. I'm JTMM. Like, subscribe, and share. I'm out.